I'd like him to do his thing.
D, he needs the special.
Okay, look at me, Brian. Whatever it is, everything's gonna be okay. Got him.
He got me.
I like to say everything will be all right, or it won't be, and that's all right too. This is what they talk about in recovery when they're talking about accepting life on life's terms. Now, on this channel, we often talk about acting like you're in control of your own life, acting like you're in control of your own outcomes, because that drives you to action. But there are forces in life that are beyond your control. If you ask a man, does he have free will? He might say, of course I do. And to prove it, raise his hand. Now, at the same time that he's proven he has free will, he chose to raise his hand, he's also proven that he's subject to forces beyond his own control, which in this case is gravity. You can choose to put your hand up, but you don't get to choose whether or not to put it down. That choice has already been made for you.
Can you give me the special and tell me everything's gonna be okay?
Brian, everything's gonna be okay.
Thank you.
Maybe just not the way you want it.
Wait, you added that. Don't add things.
Look, all we can do is believe that things are gonna work out the way they're supposed to. That's what everything's gonna be okay really means.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to Vita Exalted, the Cultivated Life. My name is Ben, child of God and addict, and today we're going to be taking kind of a left turn. Usually on this channel, we talk about taking control of your life, tending your garden, growing the life that you want, and that you are in control of your actions and your outcomes. But today we're going to be talking about the way of water, a concept in Taoism about trusting and letting go.
Specifically, non-action as doing nothing, non-action as not striving but harmonizing your actions with the Tao, and non-action as natural or spontaneous action. Let's start with non-action as doing nothing. By this, Taoists meant not altering actions to challenge or confront obstacles in your path. One of the best metaphors for understanding this interpretation of Wu Wei is to imagine a rock in a stream. The Tao Te Ching says, that which is of all things most yielding can overwhelm that which is of all things most hard. That is how I know the value of action that is actionless. Here, that which is of all things most yielding refers to water, and that which is of all things most hard is rock. Imagine a big stone that falls into a stream. The water doesn't push against the stone trying to move it, it bends around it. But even as the water bends around the stone, the water continues to flow downstream. Eventually, the stone will erode away, but the water flows as it did before, during, and after the stone's existence. Non-action can also involve not striving for what you want, things like fame, wealth, and power, but also even peace or social harmony. Instead, you should let your actions follow the natural patterns of the universe. We often describe this as being in harmony with the Tao. Both the Tao Te Ching and the Zhuangzi praise those who strive for nothing and yet obtain what is needed. In other words, if you pattern your actions according to the natural laws or principles of the universe, you will effortlessly arrive where you should be. Returning to the water and stone analogy, we see again that the water is not striving to remove the stone from its path, and yet ultimately the stone is cleared away. So if you're in harmony with the Tao, then following your natural course will not only result in getting what you need, but ultimately will result in removing or overcoming any supposed obstacles in your way. I say supposed because what you perceive as an obstacle might not actually be one. Consider a parable from the Huainan Tzu about a lost horse.
Once upon a time, there was a Chinese farmer who lost a horse, ran away. And all the neighbors came around that evening and said, that's too bad. And he said, maybe. The next day, the horse came back and brought 7 wild horses with it. And all the neighbors came around and said, why, that's great, isn't it? And he said, maybe. The next day, his son was attempting to tame one of these horses and was riding it and was thrown and broke his leg. And all the neighbors came round in the evening and said, well, that's too bad, isn't it? And the farmer said, maybe. And the next day, the conscription officers came around looking for people for the army, and they rejected his son because he had a broken leg. And all the neighbors came round that evening and said, isn't that wonderful? And he said, maybe. The whole process of nature is an integrated process of immense complexity, and it is really impossible to tell whether anything that happens in it is good or bad, because you never know what will be the consequences of a misfortune, or you never know what will be the consequences of good fortune.
This story highlights why Taoists think Wu Wei is critical both as a state of being and as a way of conducting yourself. You have no way of knowing if your actions will ultimately help or hinder you. Even if you act with good intentions, you still can't be sure there won't be unintended negative consequences. Thus, non-action as an action prevents harm, while non-action as the state of being in harmony with the Tao ensures you will live out the number of years heaven has allotted you, and thus avoid a premature and usually violent death. Taoists aren't big on living fast and dying young. It's all about that longevity and immortality. The third way to understand Wu Wei that we'll examine here is as natural action, which is probably the most common use of the term, returning yet again to Lao Tzu's metaphor of the water and the stone. The water does not change its nature or become something else now that the stone is there. The stone erodes away precisely because the water only acts like itself. For people, it's helpful to think of the difference between reaction and reflex. From the Taoist perspective, reflex is non-action and reaction is action. A reflex is innate, unconscious, and effortless. It's devoid of emotion and happens spontaneously, in the sense that it seems to happen of its own accord, modern knowledge of physiology notwithstanding. A reaction is the opposite. Even though reaction might seem automatic, it's a product of the mind. It can be something learned and practiced. Another idea that early Taoists associate with non-action is the concept of uselessness. You can see that in the parable mentioned before. The son's broken leg made him useless to the army, but preserved his life. The principle of uselessness is also commonly taught using the example of a gnarled and crooked tree. Useless for building things, but precisely because of its uselessness, the tree is never cut down and lives a long life as a tree, which is what nature intended. Moreover, the tree is only situationally useless. When used for shade or shelter, the tree is useful. It's useless only if you mistake it as a tree for timber or fruit. The Tao Te Ching also associates non-action with the virtues of flexibility and passivity. Arguably, Wu Wei is a form of action that encompasses both of these, depending on the situation. Returning again to the analogy of a stone in the stream, we can see both of the virtues present in non-action. The water demonstrates flexibility by bending around the stone, but it also demonstrates passivity by not challenging or confronting the stone. In early Chinese thought, these are feminine virtues, and it's clear that the philosophical strands of the text embrace a positive view of the feminine overall, in contrast to most of its contemporary thinkers. So whether you understand Wu Wei in terms of reflex, uselessness, flexibility, or spontaneity, it's important to remember that there's not a one-size-fits-all answer. An effortless and authentic existence will vary depending on who or what you are. So too is non-action equally dependent on the person and situation. One of the most famous stories from the Zhuangzi illustrates what this means. Once when Zhuangzi was fishing in the Pu River, the king of Chu sent 2 officials to him and announced to him, "I would like to trouble you with the administration of my realm." Zhuangzi held onto the fishing pole and without turning his head said, "I have heard that there is a sacred tortoise in Chu that has been dead for 3,000 years. The king keeps it wrapped in cloth and boxed and stores it in the ancestral temple. Now, would this tortoise rather be dead and have its bones left behind and honored, or would it rather be alive and dragging its tail through the mud?" The 2 officials responded, "It would rather be alive and dragging its tail in the mud." Zhuangzi said, "Go away. I will drag my tail through the mud." This means that for the turtle, being dead but highly honored was worthless when compared with its unglamorous but natural way of living. For Zhuangzi, serving in government would have been equally unnatural and therefore worthless. Yet for the king of Chu, who was born to rule, refusing to do so and instead going off to spend his days fishing would have been unnatural and thus not Wu Wei. So to return to the beginning, Wu Wei can be translated a lot of different ways because it means different things depending on the context and the philosopher who's using the term. It's something you do or don't do. It's a characteristic of the Tao. It's a state of being that reflects the patterns of the cosmos. It's being flexible and passive. It embraces spontaneity, effortlessness, and authenticity. It's doing nothing, not striving, and natural action.
So what did we learn today? Non-action doesn't mean do nothing. It means don't be reactive. When obstacles come, and they will, don't change up what you're already doing. It means go with the flow. Not everything that appears good is good, and not everything that appears bad is bad. And we can't usually tell the difference except in hindsight. That's why they say hindsight is 20/20. And lastly, we learned that non-action is specific to each person and each person's path. What you should be doing and which direction you should be going depends on who you are. What is your identity? To be in a flow state, you have to change your identity. When your identity was an alcoholic or an addict, the path you're on led to prison, to poverty, to being alone. And now in recovery, you have a new identity. What is your path now? Who are you and who are you becoming? I see recovery as a chance to start over, to start fresh. And so your life now is full of potential. It's what in Taoism they call uncarved wood. It is nothing, and therefore it can be anything.
Michelangelo sees this huge, massive, unhewn block
Right.
of
Oh,
marble.
I see.
And inside of that, he is able to see David.
Mm-hmm.
And over time, slowly, he will chip away and he will chip away and he will chip away.
Mm-hmm.
So you see something that isn't there, that's inside of the thing, which is rough and unhewn and uncivilized and undomesticated and rambunctious and sometimes terrible. And you were able to, from that, alchemize.
That's actually part of the Tao Te Ching, the uncarved block. So a child is an uncarved block in the Taoist view, and you remove everything that's excess until what's perfect remains.
Until next time, tend your gardens.
A lot of people like to complain, but they don't want to do anything about their situation. That you are an uncommon breed.